hopefully this will follow on. This is kind of a follow-up to the previous video that I posted, which was to do with whether you're able or not to come up with a clear definition, a clear, concise definition of what it is that you do, and how that impacts your capacity to teach a range of different people. And this kind of led me into thinking about scope of practice, also in response to, or as a reaction rather, to some comments I've seen on my favourite Facebook Pilates teachers group. And the subject of scope of practice is kind of an intriguing one for me, because my certificate as a Pilates teacher doesn't make it especially clear what my scope of practice is. It just says that I'm qualified to teach mat and apparatus, I think, something along those lines, which seems rather vague. So if my qualification is as a Pilates teacher, does that mean I'm qualified to teach Pilates exercises and nothing else? And if that's the case, then we get into the thorny subject of what are Pilates exercises and what aren't. So perhaps I'm not qualified to teach exercises that aren't identifiably Pilates exercises. And then of course we have a whole debate around whose dogma you follow and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. Actually, what exercises are within my scope of practice to teach. And then there's more things that make me curious about this. So I believe that as Pilates teachers, we're also representing his philosophy. And I guess everyone cherry picks parts of that philosophy. But for example, is it beyond my scope of practice to encourage the people that I teach to spend lots of time outside in the fresh air? It's something that Pilates advocated, certainly in Your Health. There's nothing on my certificate that says that I'm qualified to make recommendations to people about the amount of time they spend in different environments. So would that be beyond my scope of practice? Equally, suggestions like the benefits of taking cold showers. I've got no qualifications to make those kind of recommendations. Now, usually, hopefully, invariably, in fact, if I share information with somebody that I'm teaching, which seems clearly to be outside of what I'm qualified to do, then I would preface it with, I'm not a medical professional, or I'm not qualified to diagnose, or something along those lines. But it feels to me like once I've formed a relationship with somebody, and that's a critical part of things, and the only kind of teaching that I'm interested in actually is where I'm forming relationships with people. So I would not consider this to be relevant if somebody were to come into this studio, I teach them exercise for an hour and then they leave. That's not the kind of teaching that I'm doing. So I'm interested in forming relationships with people and learning about them so I can understand best how to serve them, essentially. And within that relationship, to me, it would feel remiss if I knew that they had an autoimmune condition, and at a certain point in the relationship, if the subject came up, again, it would feel remiss of me not to make reference to dietary protocols that I've heard of being very successful with people with autoimmune conditions, or to say, for example, have you heard about the TED Talk by person X, which might be relevant to their condition. Now, from the point of view of my certification, I've got no qualifications to do that. So it should be outside my scope of practice by that frame of reference. Again, I have a relationship with them, and to not share information that I believe could be valuable, again, within this framework of a relationship where sharing information feels appropriate, it would seem bizarre not to do that. It's a bit like perhaps often people will come in for a session and they may want to, let's say, offload about things that have been bothering them, maybe that day or that week or something. Maybe the first few minutes they might be sharing something that's been really frustrating them. Now, it's not within my scope of practice to listen to people talking about their problems. So should I be saying, sorry, hold on a second, that's above my pay grade, you need to see a psychoanalyst to share your problems? To me, would seem to be extraordinary. So if you're somebody who is very concerned about whether or not Pilates teachers are working inside or outside their scope of practice, it would be really interesting to know exactly what you think the boundaries of being a qualified Pilates teachers are in terms of that scope of practice. So do please feel free to share if that's something you feel strongly about.